Brought to you by Exabeam, I'm Steve Moore, and this is the new CISO. So we'll pick things back up here on what is our part two. We've been talking about recovering from a breach and with a specific lens on ransomware, but it really could be any type of problem.
Yes.
The one thing that I was going to ask, and we've hinted at this, that it happens, but I haven't asked you a specific percentage. There's some that are floating out there, and there's no exact number, but from your perspective, approximately, if you're hit with a ransomware attack and you pay, or even just attempt to recover, what's the percentage that you're revisited and re-ransomed? I hear the number's actually pretty high that I've seen, that many of these companies, they try to recover, they may or may not even pay, but they're
right.
recovering, and the flaws still exist, and so they're double tapped. So from your point of view, is that 10%? Is it 20%?
It's really high. I don't have a percentage on that, but think about it from the lens of the attacker. Mm-hmm. They've spent a bunch of time, learning about you, doing the reconnaissance. I love to take this all back to espionage tactics because that's what criminals are modeling. They do reconnaissance. They do their surveillance. They learn about you. They find your weaknesses. They find your pain points. They find that one employee who they can fool, right? Or they find that one vulnerability that you forgot to patch, and they use a known exploit. It's almost always a known exploit. They're too lazy, really, to build zero-day attacks. Although they do that too if there's a target they really, really want. But that's normally like a nation state, right? The criminals are just using known vulnerabilities because they know that we don't patch, right? And so they figured that perfect way in, and they're really excited about that. And now they spend the time to quietly attack, move laterally, maintain presence, and then when they feel like they've got a critical mass of systems, they bring it down with a ransomware attack. Or they send you a note saying, we have just stolen 2 terabytes of data. Here are some samples of what we've stolen. And if you want your data back or you want us to destroy it, you have to pay. Right, an extortion attack, or they're finding very embarrassing information that would harm the company, and they blackmail you. Right? They say we found this. We're going to send it to the news agencies if you don't pay us. Right? So it's not always just ransomware. True. But however it happens, they have invested a lot of time in their crime, and if you just go back and say we're not going to pay you, F off. And roll back to before it was a problem, or just like gamble that they're going to dump your information if it's not ransomware, then they're going to be pretty mad because they've spent a lot of time and they were expecting a payday and they want to get paid for their efforts. I mean, to the top tier cyber criminals, this is a business and they get very angry at you when you don't pay. Right? They're very polite when you pay. They're incredibly polite when you pay. They have help desks that will, for companies that are small and have never dealt with a ransomware encryption, they will teach you, how to use the decryption key. In fact, we've seen cases where a company gets attacked and they decide we're just going to pay the ransom, and then they receive their keys and then they're like, I don't know what to do with this, and they're talking to the attacker through their dark web message board link. And the attacker finally says, no, don't worry, we'll just decrypt it for you because we still control all your systems, right? And so which means they still control all your systems. They're going to come right back. Right. And they will. Every time. They will come right back because you didn't pay and they didn't make money, and they're going to find a way to make money somehow. Now, if they've stolen your data, they're going to find a way to make money there. They're going to sell it. They're going to find someone who wants to buy it. They're going to populate it in marketplaces. They're going to dump it. If they get really angry at you, they're going to dump it in these open data repositories and make it known to the world that they breached you and all your data is sitting here in the cloud. And reporters will dig into it, lurkers and people who just are interested in conspiracy theories will dig into it. You can be damn sure your competitors are going to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And that can be incredibly damaging.
It's interesting. A couple of things. You mentioned earlier the likelihood of sort of the harvesting of data. So once you have access, once an adversary has access, whether it's criminal or espionage, I have had exposure to both cases firsthand from my past and current life. What's curious and what most people don't get is the speed at which the adversary is looking for information. And in particular, it used to be how quick they want to jump to SharePoint, looking for documentation, infrastructure diagrams, system names, maybe even a password that's stuck someplace. So first off, I encourage people to really think of that as one of the first destinations once arrival happens. When the aliens arrive, that used to be a slide I had. What do you do when the aliens arrive, kind of thing, and then, how do you act? And where do they go? What do they do first? But most people don't realize that. But now, with the use of generative AI, that's incumbent inside of many organizations, where there are helpers internally for employees to say, hey, give me the name of. What is the system name of? We're starting to see that. And so I guess you've got perspectives on just in general. If you have, I'm sure you have lots of color to add, just in general for the listener. Some are familiar with this, some are not. We have technical and non-technical listeners. But just the idea that should be something, the access to your data, SharePoint and others, is just critical to understand what happened and who's snooping and is there a change in behavior that I don't think most people realize that they're going to go immediately to that point.
Well, a couple things there. So one of the first things that they look for is file tree. So they'll go through SharePoint and they'll try to find a full file tree of everything and where it is. Because if you think of where the basic way that maybe a organization will build their data architecture is just drives. Right? You have a drive for exec, you have a drive for finance, you have a drive for HR. Sometimes like finance and HR is on the same drive. And you're using SharePoint as a modality to create levels of access control. Like this person works in finance, he can access the finance drive, and she works in HR and she can access the HR drive, and the exec team can access everything, right? And depending on how you set it and your architecture of permissions, you're using SharePoint to drive that. Yeah, they want to get into there and they want to understand that architecture. They want to quietly do that reconnaissance. Once they're in, they want to understand where your data is, where the patterns are for who can access that data, and how they can best exploit it. Right? Because they want to create maximum pressure when they bring it all down. And they always try to steal the file tree, and they always try to tell you, here's the file tree of all your data, listing all of your documents and all of these different repositories. And we stole it all, right? That's what they always say. We stole it all of it. We somehow stole 10 terabytes of data. We have all of it. And if you don't have a system where you can show that that's even feasible or not, then now you're stuck having to assume that they stole it all, and that can be devastating. Now you take Agentic AI, right? And I'm not talking about your Microsoft Copilot or your enterprise version of ChatGPT or something like that where you can ask it questions. I'm talking about AI agents, because more and more companies are allowing their employees to spin up AI agents to do things. I talked to someone at a company in sales, and she said, I've got, I don't know, like 10 AI agents that are doing all sorts of things for me in sales, and IT doesn't even know, what they're doing or how they're doing it. And they're outward facing, and they're reaching out, and they have abilities to pull in lists and send emails to potential prospects and all that kind of stuff. So think about what happens if HR is using an AI agent. Finance is using one to do things, and they have access. The agents have access, and now they're hijacked internally by the attacker who's in your system, who can now command. They don't even have to reach out. Now they have basically a text box where they can type and ask that AI agent to go do things for them, because they're internal and now they're controlling it. That can be really, and there's an issue where I don't think organizations have really thought about what happens when one gets hijacked. And, even if an adversary isn't in your systems, those AI agents can cause chaos. There was a case I was looking at, a news story I'm telling, where a company is allowing their employees to use AI, and this exec at the company decides, hey, I'm just going to play with this agent and ask it this question. return all documents in the company that have my name on it, right? And so it does. The agent's like, yes, I'd love to help you. And it goes out and it finds every document that has a name on it, including one it pulls from HR, which is a list of their next round of layoffs with this guy's name on it, right? And all these other employees. So what he does, because he's an executive, he's not an idiot, is he quietly takes the list, gets an attorney, contacts everyone on the list, and then they all sue together. With one attorney, split the cost. It's cheap for them. It's really expensive for the organization because now they're defending multiple lawsuits because this layoff document was exposed because HR is using AI and agents, and the agent had access. Now, why does this AI agent have access to these confidential drives or this confidential document? Because the company hadn't thought of that. They hadn't thought of putting these guardrails and safeguards and ensuring that, hey, there needs to be some second level before you can access this sort of information. But the AI agent it could go off and do whatever it wanted.
So you bring up an excellent point, and it's something. It's one of the most frequent topics I have right now in my conversations around the world is this notion of all the misalignment that can occur. So there's massive adoption of AI, right? And I think it'll help a lot of companies. However, we're going to break a lot of eggs along the way, and this misalignment of the agent's level of access and ability exceeds even what should be available to the person initiating the query. And furthermore, organizations that typically didn't have, I'm seeing this as a newly forming trend, and I'd like your feedback on this. Mm-hmm. Some of my background is on insider threat. They're actually forming, even if they lack the capability before, they're building insider threat teams. And the trigger is not the traditional insider threat framework. It's actually because of AI. So they're building capabilities around it because a misbehaving AI agent behaves in essence like a misbehaving, or can behave like a misbehaving human.
Certainly.
And so understanding the behavior around that and access, and is there drift, misalignment, is there some sort of malfeasance, whatever that might be, compromise. I find this fascinating. And if I were pursuant to the show as sort of this virtual mentorship, if I were an up-and-coming security person, I say that generically, and in any of this, it would be an area that I would spend an excess amount of time on in attempting to master that and understand ways to how all of that, what's the potential risk, what's the effect to it. If I were a lawyer or someone in privacy or even HR or whatever, I would focus on that very closely. So your thoughts there?
Yeah, certainly. AI really is changing the game. And it's sink or swim. If you don't provide AI, if you don't provide an agentic AI chatbot to your employees, they're going to go get one, right? And that's what we say. We do these vulnerability assessments at companies, and they're like, well, we don't know what to do with AI, so we're just prohibiting it. And great. Mm. So now you have what we call a shadow IT problem. All of your employees are using, the free version of ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, and they're taking your confidential crap and they're dropping it in there because they just don't want to edit, right? Or they don't want to draft a memo, or they don't want to draft the email. No one wants to draft anything anymore. Nobody wants to write. Nope. Writing is dying. It's a dying industry because people are just asking the AI to do all that work for them. And I mean, in a way, you can't blame them. Humans were designed to find the fastest, most expedient path to a result with the least amount of work possible. That's what our brains do. It's what builds so much incredible innovation, right, in history. But AI can also make you kind of lazy, and it can be very dangerous because if now you have employees who are putting all of this stuff in non-secure AI, then you have trouble. So we always say, look, you got to have a resource. You have to have an internal resource. And then it has to be an internal resource that your employees want to use. If it's so locked down and it's so impractical and and ugly, they're not going to use it. They're still going to go to their old ChatGPT that they absolutely love, right? So there's that problem. And then, of course, there's the issue of, are you properly putting guardrails around what your AI can and can't do, what it can access, and when, especially with agents. And with AI agents, it is beyond critical to make sure that you are, once again, having a permission structure baked into the agent that says that, you cannot look at this information without a second level review. So in order to look at finance information, or let's just take finance as an example. In order to look at this information and return it to an employee, in order to make a payment on an invoice, in order to wire any funds at all, you first must get authorization from this person and this person, right? The same problem you would have with an individual in the company who gets fooled by a business email compromise, or now an AI impersonation attack from an external criminal attacker saying, hey, I'm the CFO, and you see me on this Zoom call, and I need you to send this wire right now. This happens with AI, virtual impersonation attacks. That same problem where you train everybody like, I don't care who asks for you to send this wire. 2 people have to sign off on it, right?
Right.
The same thing with your agent. Your agent should not be able to send a wire of funds or pay an invoice or do anything that moves either money or data out of your organization to anyone without a human being able to say yes, right? And if you're not setting up your agents that way, yeah, exactly what you say. An agent goes rogue. I mean, the technology isn't perfect. It might think, hey, this is great. Yeah. We should pay all this stuff and get it off my little friend human's desk, right? And it goes and it does it, and now you've just sent a ton of money to a cyber criminal who fooled it.
It's interesting. I think people don't realize the persistence, kind of the goal setting, that when you ask an agent, the absolute nature of that can occur. These examples that I'm seeing, either reading about, studying, or seeing firsthand, where there are areas of, I don't know, I've got a border collie, and that border collie, once it gets something in its head, it'll do anything to get to. So if he knocks a ball underneath my couch, he's not doing anything else until he has that ball. And I tease, he's awesome. But he is focused on that ball, and he will raise all kinds of hell until it's done, until he has that ball. And the same thing exists, so he'll dig at the carpet, he'll chew on the couch, he'll whatever to do that. And the same thing happens and is happening where there is a mission in the mind of that agent to do almost whatever's necessary, and maybe even go beyond what a human would do. And that's the piece that I think people are going to have trouble with, realizing when they make these solutions. And there's such a rush to get this out, and to experience this, and to stay relevant, and to stay sharp, and to find these resource gains, right? Where I think we're going to be in a season of well, we're already here, of these incidents and breaches where not only do we have the problem, but we don't have the ability to recreate what even happened. We don't even know. You mentioned earlier about understanding where the adversary went, what data did they touch, what was exfiltrated, kind of building that mapping of, okay, what's my exposure? They won't have any of that because there's not the I'll call it the logging or the telemetry in many organizations to even understand that. And so what was stolen, what was accessed, I have no idea.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. I kind of counsel, let's not go the AI agent route, right? Until you have already mapped your data, until you actually understand where your data is and who has access to it, which most organizations, I would say, don't. Right? They don't
go there.
They don't, and they, and sometimes, they had it on-prem and it was all sort of mapped out. Then they moved to the cloud, and now they've made the mistake of everybody has access to it. Now you're going to add an AI agent. Now they have access to everything, and that can be incredibly dangerous. Not only if it goes rogue, but if it's corrupted, if it's compromised by an external attacker or an internal attacker who, there still are trusted insiders. There are still individuals in companies who decide, I'm going to make a buck by becoming a spy because I watched the show The Americans and I think I could do it too, right? And or they're just angry, disgruntled, and they just want to destroy data, or they want to find things. That AI agent, if it doesn't have those guardrails, is going to be the perfect perfect search agent for them. Find everything about this new intellectual property, right, and give it all to me, and then they download it all. And if you don't have systems that say, hey, this guy just downloaded all this data and that the AI agent gave them, and that might be a problem, let's flag it for cybersecurity, then you could be dead in the water.
It's their virtual, and you'll know what I'm referencing. It's their virtual access agent.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
It's going to make that connection to the right thing. The right person would be the human element of it. That's that buffer. And
well, here's the other thing, Steve. So think of this. You traditionally we have guardrails around people. So if you're cyber, you have a console and you can see the access of things, right? And you can see how Joe over here works in this area of the company and is now over here accessing something they normally don't. And a good endpoint detection response XDR console will say, Joe's accessing something they don't normally access, that they're not privy to, that they don't have access to. Flag it, lock him out, and call in an investigator to do some forensics and find out if that account's been compromised, right? That's threat hunting. That's where we want to go with cybersecurity. Mm-hmm. But what if Joe is a disgruntled employee and he doesn't access anything? He just asks the agent to do it.
Right.
And you're not looking, because you didn't think about it. You're not looking at what the agent is accessing. You're not logging what the agent is able to access. You haven't even thought about it. And now the agent just returns all this stuff. He downloads it and saves it to a drive, and he's just stolen your information. So there are anytime you add a new technology, and this is what I say in sort of the methodology part of my book, prepare, right? So we've talked about that. You got to prepare ahead of the attack. Don't wait for the pressure situation to examine your cybersecurity. Then assess, right? You do that vulnerability assessment, and you're constantly assessing. There's no set and forget. There's no easy button for cyber. And then when you see the problem, right? Joe just accessed something they shouldn't. You investigate, and then finally, you have to decide to act. You can't sit on your hands. You can't assume it won't happen to me. You have to assume that it will happen to me. I'm going to take decisive action now before the pressure situation happens. But in this example, every time you add a new cybersecurity, you loop back to prepare, right? Anytime, you add a new technology or a new key person or a new partner or some external company or database that has access to your data, you go right back to prepare and you do a reassessment of your cybersecurity. You do a new vulnerability assessment. You see how this new technology, this new tool, this new partner, this new vendor, whatever, impacts the cybersecurity structure you built. Otherwise, all you have is a house of cards, and as soon as you add that AI agent, it knocks it all down. So this idea of preparing ahead of the threat, constantly assessing your cybersecurity, investigating when you see that problem, and deciding, it's a constant loop as you have to constantly reassess your cybersecurity.
But back to this constant loop, though, I see the adoption of AI being this creature that we adopt that is going to rapidly expose the sins of our past, meaning we've never been great at identity management.
Right.
So we don't manage accounts well, especially think of service accounts, think of non-human identities. Now we have non-deterministic identities and these methods that AI would use, these token-based access, and this sort of non-traditional lens into identity. And then we've never been super great at entitlement management. So, Eric was in this department, but he's moved and he's going to inherit these new. And then you mentioned earlier, or I did, that we've never done a great job at asset lists and owners and things like that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And the data classification, what data do I even have and where does it live? So we have very few organizations, and I'm even just the asset list thing. Most companies don't have a good asset list. In fact, it's to the point that it should be a IT product, or some companies even have a hard time even our federal government saying we've spent this much money, what assets do we have, right? I mean,
Right.
everybody has the problem. Those are all sins of our past, and now we've introduced this other accelerant into the formula. And so my point is we've been struggling, many organizations struggle with staying the head above water kind of situation. And they've kind of left those other things kind of in an as-is. But the CISO doesn't necessarily own data classification. That's maybe a business thing. And
Right.
I'd argue they shouldn't even own the asset list, meaning they might participate in that, but somebody else should own that. My personal opinion, that should be a product that the CISO utilizes. And so we got data classification, we got asset ownership, we got inventory, we've got identity. Now, they might own identity. In many cases they do. They own at least the provisioning of it in the life cycle of the identity. But what's the cooperation that it's going to take? It's a long setup to this question.
Yeah.
Sorry. But what's it going to take?
Well, I've been advocating for a while that your IT and security should be unified. This idea of having IT's over here and they do this, and cybersecurity's over here and they do that. That doesn't make any sense anymore. In fact, cybersecurity really, needs to be threaded throughout the organization, because every employee has some role to play in cybersecurity, and separating out your IT and your cyber, right? Your security operations center is separate from your IT networking and help desk and that sort of stuff. That causes a disconnect, an unnecessary seam, right, between two parts of your organization that should be working in concert now. That's kind of an old way of thinking, and I think that's why a lot of modernizing and very sort of, to call it cyber aware companies are combining the two organizations under the CISO, right? Or under a CISO, and maybe the CIO is in there, but it's in flux right now on how you do that, because it slows response. It creates this finger pointing. It was you and it wasn't us. We did our job, you didn't, right? And it should never be that. IT necessarily has to be part of cybersecurity and vice versa. And so I think unifying it is the way to go.
I'm going to ask you an intentionally difficult question. So then with that unification, who should the CISO report to?
Yeah, that's tough. So I think the CISO reports to the CEO, right, and the board, and has to have a line to the board. And I've been a proponent for a long time. The board either has to have a board member with a background in security, or they have to have an advisor to the board that has that knowledge, right? Because the board has to independently understand these tensions and these problems and where investment should go. That is independent of relying on the CEO saying that no, this is what we think, right? And there has to be a direct line from the CISO to the board so that the CISO can answer their questions, so they can reach out. You see a lot of organizations, especially small ones that we're dealing with right now with my company, where the CEO might be very jealous of that board relationship, and nobody else is allowed to talk to them except through me. Wow. And now you've got a language problem because the CISO, you're playing that game of telephone, and boards need to have that actionable information quickly so they can make the best decisions. And that's why the CISO should always report to the board. I think you put them on top, right under the CEO. That everybody reports to the chief executive, right? You're all executives, but you have to have that line. For example, a general counsel should always have a line to the board. A chief ethics officer should always have a line to the board, and the CISO should always have a line to the board. Those are the three main ones. Now, sometimes you add the CFO, sometimes not, but those are critical lines to the board, and the CISO needs to be part of that.
No, that's great advice, and that's often a controversial topic because there's different reporting structures all over the world, and it kind of varies on company size. I still see most of the CISOs I interact with, not all, There's some larger companies where this is different, but they are still reporting in through a CTO or a CIO. And the problem is with that, and I want to underscore a point you made, is anytime that there is and I've said this before on the show, there's a level of abstraction and translation that occurs anytime you report into someone else and then they make it theirs and then they massage it and move it up, right? And so there's this translation that occurs, and I got to see it firsthand. And you write up an issue, and it's 3 slides of information becomes one, and then that maybe goes up another level, and those 3 slides that became 1 slide becomes 1 bullet, and it may go up another level, and now it's in the appendix,
Right.
in the deck, and then it doesn't get any attention. That's the reality.
Well, let me ask you a question, Steve. So you have a CIO and you have a CISO. Could the CIO do the CISO's job?
Well, I'll spin it back this way. I have seen some CISOs become CIOs, and I have also seen organizations where the roles have flipped, meaning the CIO now reports to the CISO. Interestingly, and so generally, most CISOs spend a long bit of their career figuring out that craft.
Yes.
Now, I have seen folks come in from other areas, and culturally, it depends where in the world you are, where you are an executive and you're on a rotation. So you become the CISO with very little experience because you're on a rotation. That happens in Asia, as an example, very commonly. And so it's kind of a trick question, but
well,
the answer is it depends. But yeah, they could certainly the CIO could they become the CISO? Yes, they could, but
but they could become it, but they have to learn a new skill. Yeah. Whereas usually your CISO can step right into the role of the CIO because they typically have that background, then they learn security on top of that. And so who should report to who? I still think we've had issues where you bring in a fractional CISO to help the CIO, and everything goes wrong in like the network, right? And now our fractional CISO is not doing the cybersecurity anymore. They're doing the IT work because they already have that background and know it better than that person in place at the company. So yeah, I think it almost becomes redundant if you have a really good CISO and you're going to unify your security and your operations, right? Your IT operations and your security operations center. If you're going to unify them, you unify them under the CISO because that's the person who can perform all the roles. And then the staff reports up to them.
I think some of the best security teams I've worked as a part of and helped advise are hybrid teams anyway, where for example, you mentioned the Security Operations Center. I think a great SOC is 50% non-security people, traditional security people. It's an Active Directory expert.
Yes, absolutely.
It's areas that it's bringing in the tribal knowledge and skill sets from other areas of the company to then put a security lens on it. And if you have good senior security people, they're going to coach and teach the security piece. But now you have this very fast-acting, response group that can do really interesting things quickly because they have both. They have that hybrid lens to it.
Yeah.
And they still have friends in the old departments, and it works very, very well.
Right. And what that does is it relieves this one problem where you're in the middle of a breach and now you have to submit a ticket to IT to get information, right? Because they love their tickets. So, yeah, if it's all unified, that IT person is sitting next to you in the chair in the combat zone and you get your information right away. You're not waiting.
Hey, I've got a couple more. I want to shift a little bit because you're a kind of a rare set of backgrounds, both in your time in the bureau, but then in law, and then now your current role. There's kind of this Venn diagram that's in my mind, and we haven't really hit much on the legal element. I don't know if you have a short list, you probably do, of things you see. So call it either, it could be post-breach, but just in general, things that security teams do that put them in unnecessary legal harm, or things that organizations do that put them unnecessary. You know, I spent some time as 30B6 and representing companies and expert witness stuff, and so I've had a little bit of exposure to that, but that's typically rare experience on the practitioner side, and even amongst a lot of executives. So through some hard-learned lessons, I have a miniature list, but from your perspective as someone who's done all of that,
right.
Is there a short list of stuff to say, like, hey, avoid this, or hey, I often see that?
Right. Well, here are just a few. First is not investing in cybersecurity insurance. I know it's very expensive. I know that the insurer, in order to cover you or endorse that endorsement to your insurance policy, is going to want to see at least basic minimal levels of cybersecurity acumen within the company. And sometimes companies just don't want to go down that road and prove it. So they just decide, we're not going to invest in this. We're probably not going to get attacked. That's a terrible idea. And it's negligent today. You are taking an immense risk if you don't have that cybersecurity insurance breach endorsement. Here's another one: not understanding your data architecture, not taking the steps to understand where the data is and who has access to it. Right? It's not just the list of who has what device and where it is, but also who has access to the data repositories, and how are we segmenting that data so that there isn't a single point of failure. And that's absolutely critical, because that's where you're going to get into a lot of trouble if an attacker gets in and then is able to steal everything. So that's a huge problem. And then, of course, the idea that, we're probably not at risk. We don't have to have a big investment in cybersecurity. You see a company where you go and you do the vulnerability assessment, and it's like, yeah, our EDR is Windows Defender, right? And that's it. We're not investing in technology, and it's good enough. It's like, no, not really. Like, you need to have something. You need to invest in something, and then you need to train your people on how to use it. Here's that last point. You might go get the top tier cybersecurity software, and you've installed it on every machine, and your endpoint security is up and running, and your consoles are going, and but you don't have anybody internally who's trained to use it.
Yeah.
And that you haven't taken the time to do that. So you have this great sports car you can't drive, and you got to leave it in the garage, and it's not going to help you when there's a problem, because you don't understand what this alert means or what I have to do. So, when you make that cybersecurity investment, there's necessarily the training that comes with it, so that your team knows how to use it. And if you don't have a team, right? If you're a small business and you have an IT team but you don't have a security team, then you need to outsource that. You need to have someone on speed dial that is going to be looking at that console on your behalf and calling quickly to say, there's an alert, you need to shut this down, right? And those are some of the big mistakes that, yes, you're not doing the bare minimum, and then a plaintiff could say, you didn't even try, right? And that's not what you want to hear. You want to show that you made a reasonable effort to protect the data that you are tasked with protecting. Because when a customer, when an employee, when an individual, even an employee who's giving you their passport information, their banking information, the information that we retain for employees, you are you're taking the risk of protecting that information. You have to protect it. So you have to at least show that, yes, we took reasonable steps to do this. And it's a kind of high bar, but if you're not even taking those basic steps, then you can be in a lot of trouble in a litigation situation.
I have three quick questions for you, well, one of which is the final question for the show. They're all easy. Well, the first one's difficult. The first one's the tricky one. So what's worse then, through the eyes of a lawyer, to generate an alert and not look at it, or to not generate an alert when you're supposed to? Meaning, so being sort of unaware, or sort of or ignorant, or sloth. Like, which is the?
So Yeah. So not doing the work in the first place that leads to the alert versus, you did all the work and an alert was generated and you didn't even look at it, right? Because you either didn't understand or know. I honestly think that it is obviously not doing the work in the first place, right? They're both are problematic. If you don't even try, then you can't reach you're not even reaching toward that idea of I took reasonable steps, right? You could get called out because, okay, we took the steps, there was an alert, and we missed it because we didn't know how. Now you're looking at firing a person, right? Or reprimanding a person who made a mistake, who dropped the ball, as opposed to the organization as a whole decided not to invest in cybersecurity and now did not protect critical confidential data that was entrusted to the organization by someone externally or someone internally. And that can be very problematic.
Excellent answer. I've been in several rooms and several discussions where this very thing was being debated, discussed with outside counsel and others. So it comes up. It comes up more frequently than people might realize. But I think I completely agree with your answer. The second question, easy. For those that are interested in knowing more about you in general, how do they find you? Where do they go?
That's a good one.
Easy.
You can go, a few places. So go to my website. It's www.ericoneil, ERICONEILL, 2 L's, that you got to get the right Irish clan, .net or .com, both of them go to the same place, but ericoneil.net. And there, if you go to the website and you can find out all about me, there's a lot on there, and you click the top banner and my awesome webmaster put like little fire emojis next to it, like start here, then you'll get access to my weekly newsletter that comes out only on Tuesday. Really low maintenance. It never floods your inbox. I only send it out once a week, and I don't use your email address for anything. It's just so we can create this community. It's thousands of people in there, and it's growing every day, where we discuss these cyber issues. I write a long form story every week about something in the world of spies, lies, and cybercrime. The cybersecurity breach of the week, the cybersecurity tip of the week. Which, if you're in IT, right, you want to share this newsletter with all your family and friends who constantly are calling you to ask, should I click on this? Is this email real, right? And they won't have to anymore because they're going to understand. They're going to see, right, all the ways that criminals attack. And they're not going to have to use you as their personal IT because they will understand that, yes, this is probably a cyber criminal. And I've started doing a weekly sub-article about the IT trend of the week, whether it's some crazy prompt that creates the coolest image you've ever seen, or what chaos AI agents are causing, or those kind of things. I think my next week's newsletter is all about robots, like these crazy robots that are coming out, including one that got arrested, which is happening, right, on a Chinese street. So yeah, that's really where you can start with me. You can order my books there. You can reach out to me there, or through the newsletter, and I always reply. And I do hope that your audience will join the newsletter and join this community, and that's how I'm doing my part in making the world safe from cyber attacks.
Perfect. One final question, and it's the same question. It's actually a twist on the regular question we ask, which usually is, pursuant to the name of the show, the new CISO. What does being a new CISO mean to you? I'm going to modify it for you. Is what advice do you have to the new CISO, meaning somebody who is maybe new to the role, or maybe
Certainly.
there isn't a CISO. Maybe there's just a head of security and they're being asked to be the CISO. What advice from your background, what do you have?
Yeah, so here it is straight from me, and this is something I say on stage all the time, that as a CISO, as someone in cybersecurity, you are a spy hunter. That is what you're doing. You just throw that on your resume because that is what you're doing. You are trying to catch a spy every single day, because each and every day there is either a foreign intelligence officer, like a spy, a literal espionage spy, or a cyber criminal who has learned from them that is trying to breach your organization and steal your data, and compromise your data, and cause absolute mayhem and make your job miserable. So your job is counterintelligence. Mm-hmm. You're not building a defense. You're not going to try to build a big wall. They'll climb over it or they'll go under it. What you are doing is counterintelligence. You are actively hunting the threat before the threat hunts you, and you need to put yourself in your mindset. That's the core premise of my new book, Spies, Lies, and Cybercrime. Taking the mindset from this idea that we're going to protect into this idea that we are going to hunt. Yeah. We're going to go actively find the bad guy and hunt them and stop them before they cause the damage. That's what you need to be as a chief information security officer or anyone who has some role to play in cybersecurity today. And if you're kind of stuck in the past where we're just going to invest in some technology and turn it on and we'll be okay, then you'll be calling me to come do the breach remediation because you're going to be in the middle of a cyber attack.
Eric, excellent advice. Thank you so much for being with us today and all that you've shared.
Steve, it was my pleasure and it was a great conversation.
That's it for this episode of the new CISO. Thank you for listening. Check out more episodes on exabeam.com/podcast, and remember to rate, review, and subscribe to get brand new episodes first.